Recent testimony and media coverage have left the impression that I discouraged honest reporting about the situation in Afghanistan and that I contributed to a situation in which detainees captured by the Canadian forces were transferred to Afghan authorities without due regard to the risk of torture. This is simply not true. The mission I joined in February 2007 was characterized as 3D, referring to the pillars of defense, diplomacy, and development, all working together. But the effort was not as coordinated and coherent as it should have been and needed to be. With regard to the specific issue of detainees, it was clear that here too, greater coordination between government departments was required. When I took up my responsibilities at Foreign Affairs in February 2007, the department was already exploring ways to engage in monitoring and tracking detainees. At the same time, we had an exchange of letters with the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission, an organization for which we are a major funder, in which the AIHRC agreed to notify Canada should it learn of any mistreatment of Canadian transferred detainees. In mid-March, we began detailed work to create a contingency plan, a standard operating procedure, in the event of well-founded allegations of mistreatment. We did this not because of confirmed instances of real and substantial risk of torture or mistreatment of Canadian transferred detainees, but because it was clear that what we had in place at the time could and should be further reinforced. We were very attuned to the many problems in the Afghan justice system. In a country so beset by poverty, illiteracy, insurgency, with a lack of public institutions, and suffering from decades of civil strife, the possibility of mistreatment could not be ignored. We did not ignore it. A dedicated and experienced interdepartmental team talked with Afghan officials in Kabul and Kandahar, with allies and with informed people in the relevant international organizations. In short, everyone who had a stake in the issue, so that we could find out what they knew. We reviewed all relevant reports and documents, took the time to consult, built a common sense of objectives and purpose, a clear understanding of roles and responsibilities, and marshaled the resources to ensure effective implementation. And we negotiated a new and better arrangement with the Afghans. On May 3, 2007, our government signed a supplementary arrangement that enhanced the December 2005 arrangement in a number of important respects to make explicit Canada's expectations and Afghanistan's responsibilities. The supplementary arrangement provided us with unrestricted and private access to any person transferred by the Canadian forces to Afghan authorities, acknowledged that the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission and the International Committee of the Red Cross have the same unrestricted access, made clear that the Afghan government would investigate all allegations of abuse and mistreatment and prosecute offenders in accordance with national law and internationally applicable legal standards. And the arrangement provided that Canadian transferred detainees would only be held in a limited number of facilities, thereby facilitating access and monitoring. This was a major interdepartmental achievement and remains arguably the strongest model for any NATO nation operating in Afghanistan. Allow me to say a few words about one member of our team. Richard Colvin willingly volunteered to go into a dangerous theater of operations and undertook very challenging work at a time when there was not a long lineup of people willing to do so. He demonstrated bravery and dedication, and for that I am very, very grateful. Richard was one of a very large number of people who brought ideas, suggestions, and recommendations to bear for consideration. I didn't always agree with him, but I always listened. The volume of reporting he did would alone suggest that he always had ample opportunity to express himself and have his views considered. In fact, the revised transfer arrangement addresses each of the shortcomings he spoke to in his testimony before this committee, because of the collaborative interdepartmental work we did to get to that point. He acknowledged this. The view that I muzzled him or any other official is wrong. I left behind some colleagues who I know felt frustrated because once our own airing of views and opinions had concluded and all relevant consultations were completed, we moved decisively from debate to implementation. I am confident, though, that we did this carefully, effectively, and with total fidelity to the standards expected of us by the Canadian government, the international community, and most importantly, Canadians. Thank you very much.
could you understand from what you've said today why Mr. Colvin would have said what he said last week with respect to him having sent in strong views with respect to what he was hearing about what was happening in prisons, and secondly, the question of how welcome his additional comments and arguments would be once, as you put it, the decision was made to go with a certain approach? I mean, would you agree that, is it possible to see this as a difference of opinion between the two of you with respect to what took place?
That, to me, Mr. Ray, is one of the things that most surprised me about this exchange. Richard felt very strongly that because of the problems that everybody knew existed in the Afghan system, we needed to do one of a number of things. We could stop transferring, we could build a prison, or we could set up a robust monitoring regime for which we'd have to devote more resources. We opted for the third course. In fact, after that message, the exchange of April 24th, he sent a message about a week later saying, "Thank you for listening to my views." He mentioned in committee that he had come to meetings in Ottawa. These were not, he didn't stumble into a meeting. These were very serious high-level meetings on this file. We listened to him.
At what date?
This is in March of 2007, as we were beginning to think about how would we react, how would we build this system. Richard came to those meetings. He was consulted on the phone. He was a prolific writer. He wrote after the exchange about which I'm talking. He felt passionately about these views. He wanted us to move very quickly. We moved as quickly as we could, and a lot of his advice is incorporated in what we ended up doing.
And the other thing you say, sir, and I want you to answer this, is that the situation was so bad, and we knew there was torture, but our situation was so bad, we had some bad people on our hands, we had to get rid of them. So while we made changes, we simply then put them into the system because we couldn't keep them around. They were dangerous people. That's almost, sir, pleading a defense of necessity when you send people to risk of torture.
If that had been what I said.
No, but that's what you said.
What I said was, and this is important, the system, there were problems in the Afghan...
Let him add the question.
Okay, but that's an important assertion, and I have to address it right now.
You should.
We never, ever transferred anyone if we thought there was a substantial risk of torture. We knew that there were problems in the Afghan system, but we developed a robust monitoring system. We intervened with training. We had every means of addressing the system from the very top, the President, and we intervened with the President, through the ministers, the Director of the NDS, and on down. That we knew there were problems in Afghanistan is one thing. We were very confident that we could intervene in the system and create conditions for Canadian transferred detainees where we would meet our obligations and we could be confident that Afghans were meeting their commitments. And the facts show that over time we did 175 visits. While there were some early reports of mistreatment, many of which probably predated our arrangement, we went month after month, visit every 5 days, and we could speak with confidence in a way that we could not before as to the treatment of Canadian transferred detainees. If we had not done this, we would not be able to do that.
Can we not say that part of the problem was that there was widespread abuse in all of the jails across Afghanistan, including Kandahar? Was that not one of the problems?
The problem was that there was abuse reported in various institutions in Afghanistan.
Including the jails?
Existed.
Right.
Yes. Okay,
so we've got that. So we agree on that. Mr. Colvin agrees, you agree. And we also, I think you pointed out very well, the problems with the process that we were sending in, handing over detainees, and we couldn't monitor them up until the new agreement. Is that true?
We had visited prisons, but we didn't have a monitoring regime in place.
Exactly. So we had no idea where they were going.
We had in place commitments from the government of Afghanistan, and we had situations where the AHRC and the ICRC were in
right, but they caught in touch with us to say it's not a sufficient process, which is why we had to change it. So correct. I don't understand why there is this notion that everything was fine when everyone agrees there was problems. We say it was torture. We've said, when you're hitting people with cables, you're using electric shock. These are, this is torture. And when you have problems like that, you have to rectify. What I have problems with is if you're handing people over and you have no idea where they're going, how you can say they weren't tortured. How can we sit here and say from that period, when Mr. Colvin was reporting and when they're being handed over, that we can say 100% sure, absolute clarity, that none of them were being tortured. Can you say that?
We established the new arrangement so that we could speak with that degree of confidence.
But we can't say that prior to the arrangement.
We established the arrangement.
But I'm asking a different question. You can't say 100% assurance that the detainees that were handed over during that period weren't tortured.
I can say we have no evidence that any Canadian transfer.
But you couldn't tell because you weren't being monitored, correct?
We had no evidence that a detainee. But
you had no process either.
We had reporting from the.
Well, you're going to have to give him a chance to answer here soon.
I'm frustrated and I'm sorry,
I
Chair.
can tell.